Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today's the 20th of July, 2025. It's good to have you here. Let's jump. Oh, by the way, I hope you're staying cool for those in the Northern Hemisphere. Let's jump over to our agenda to take a look at what we're going to cover today. Today's mainly a Q&A session. I was a little late on sending the announcement out. Apologies for that. It's a birthday celebration weekend, so we got a little behind, but we are here. A couple of things. First of all, just a reminder, this is a workshop which goes along with our courses over at school.learnlightandsound.com. And also, on the main channel, we do also have the channel memberships, which gets you access to our Discord server, where we discuss all things audio for video. And then for anyone who has signed up there, if you're having any trouble getting to the Discord server, please contact me. Just email me at curtis@learnlightandsound.com, and we can get you in there and set up. Can't wait to start the conversation there. All right, today we are talking about ferrite core or bead filters. This is actually a question that we got from Robert. Apologies, I blinked on your name for just a moment here. Robert sent a question in, which was a great question, and I don't think it's anything we've talked about, at least not recently. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that, and then we'll go to the chat. And we have some question and answer. I've also got some other things I'm prepared to talk about if we have additional time, namely talking about sizing computers for post-production work. So with that, let's just jump over to this question from Robert. So Robert says, can you talk about ferrite cores on XLR and lav mic cables? How do they work? Are they effective? Do they affect the audio range of a cable? Do you use them? What sizes? Do you loop twice or more through the core? I'm asking for nothing more than what you know and your experience. Okay, so that is a very fair question, and yes, thank you, Robert. I don't know a ton, but I did do a little bit of searching around, and I do have a firsthand experience working with ferrite cores and having them solve a problem for me. So let's go back out to the main camera for just a moment here. First of all, they go by a variety of different names, but sometimes they're called ferrite beads, ferrite cores. You can see this is a USB cable. It's a USB-B to USB-A. And this is the cable that I use for when I connect the Allen & Heath SQ5 up to my computer as an audio interface. This has two ferrite beads on them. These things on the cable here. And I also have an example of an XLR cable with a ferrite bead. This is a cable that was made by Sound Speeds, and it has a little ferrite bead right here. So, what are these things? You've seen them before. They're often on power cables for sensitive electronic devices. For example, my Canon C200 here, on its power cable, there is a ferrite bead right up next to the connector that goes into the camera itself. So, what's the purpose of these? How do they work? And here's where I'm going to need to refer to Wikipedia. So we'll go over to our Mac here. All right. First up, a ferrite bead, also called a ferrite block, ferrite core, ferrite ring, EMI filter, EMI standing for electromagnetic interference filter, or ferrite choke, is a type of choke that suppresses high-frequency electronic noise in electronic circuits. Ferrite beads employ high-frequency current dissipation in a ferrite ceramic to build high-frequency noise suppression devices. So, what do? They help remove electronic noise. Let me tell you a little bit. We can go back to the main camera here for just a moment. We'll talk about how they work in just a second. So, how did I end up with this cable? This cable, I think I bought. I don't remember where I bought it, but when I first got my Allen & Heath SQ5, I used it for a period of time as my primary audio interface for my computer while I was learning how to use it. And when I initially connected it, it was sitting over here, and the computer was sitting over here. So I needed a cable that was probably 2.5, 3 meters long, and most of them come in. When you get that long, they're usually like 3 meters. So I had about a 3-meter cable. And I was getting an annoying interference hum type thing or buzzing noise in all of the audio, no matter what I did. So I went out and did some research, and I ended up buying this cable, which has the two ferrite beads, one on each end. So one on the USB-B connector, which connects to the mixer, and on the USB-A connector, which connects to the computer. And all of the hum and buzz and noise disappeared. So that is an example of where I've firsthand experience using these solving a very specific problem. So the idea with them is, as I understand it, that these filters essentially filter out very high frequency noise. So it's important to understand that every cable that's connected to a device, especially a device that is wireless in some fashion, that cable essentially becomes an antenna. So that's part of what these filter out. Is it helps to filter out some of the noise that's introduced there. Also, you can get electromagnetic interference from other things. A very common source of electromagnetic interference is AC to DC power adapters. And usually those will sound like a crackling, buzzing mess. So if you're getting that kind of thing in your audio, you might want to check to make sure that your audio cable is not sitting right next to an AC power adapter. Just move it away. It doesn't even usually require more than a few inches distance, and you can usually solve that problem. Now, I talked to Alan Williams about why he put the ferrite bead on his XLR cable, and noted that it's on the end. It's only on one end. It's on the end, the male end, which is the output end of the cable. So he's essentially filtering it before sending it into whatever you're connected to, whether it's a mixer or recorder or whatever. He said it's generally not necessary on quality XLR cables, and in fact, these particular cables that he made are made with Canary Star Quad cable, which in itself does a really good job of it had very high immunity to electromagnetic interference and RF interference. But he said he put that there as a last-ditch kind of insurance policy. So to make the best quality cables possible, he's filtering out any possible thing that came in to the cables. And I've never had an issue with them. They've never seemed to affect the audio quality in one way or another. And I've never had any sort of interference issues with this cable. I have never had any other interference with other Canary cables that I've experienced firsthand. However, with lesser cables, usually less expensive cables, I have experienced some interference. Usually that's when the cable ends up right next to an AC power adapter. Most common use case. So that's another thing too, that I think a lot of wedding videographers who give the DJ a cable and say, hey, can I record from your board so that I can capture this part of the overall festivities here at the wedding? And sometimes those cables end up in a spot where they're picking up electromagnetic interference. And so that's why it's really important to have these high quality cables. All right, let's read a little bit more in terms of their use and how they work. So ferrite beads prevent electromagnetic interference in two directions, from a device or to a device. A conductive cable acts as an antenna, as we just discussed. If the device produces radio frequency energy, this can be transmitted through the cable, which acts as an unintentional radiator, or in other words, antenna, like a transmitting antenna. In this case, the bead is required for regulatory compliance to reduce electromagnetic interference. Conversely, if there are other sources of EMI, such as household appliances, the bead prevents the cable from acting as an antenna and receiving interference from these other devices. This is particularly common on data cables and medical equipment. I think in this case we can consider an audio cable a data cable. Large ferrite beads are commonly seen on external cabling. In addition, various smaller ferrite beads are used internally in circuits, on conductors or around the pins of small circuit board components, such as transistors, connectors, and integrated circuits. Beads can block low-level unintended radio frequency energy on wires intended to be DC conductors by acting as a low-pass filter. So as I mentioned before, a low-pass filter is filtering out higher frequencies and allowing the lower frequencies to pass through. So that's how this is operating. All right. Ferrite beads are one of the simplest and least expensive interference filters to install on pre-existing electronic cabling. For a simple ferrite ring, the wire is wrapped around the core through the center, typically 5 or 7 times. Clamp-on cores are also available, which attach without wrapping the wire. This type of ferrite core is usually designed so that the wire passes only once through it. If the fit is not snug enough, the core can be secured with cable ties, or if the center is large enough, the cabling can loop through one or more times. However, although each loop increases the impedance to high frequencies, it also shifts the frequency of the highest impedance to a lower frequency. Small ferrite beads can be slipped over component leads to suppress parasitic oscillation. All right, so just to kind of summarize that, yes, they can. Oftentimes you'll see a cable, and again, if we go back to the main camera here, you don't see it on these, but I have seen others, especially usually from AC power leads that are coming to the device right before the device connector. Oftentimes you'll see ferrite core, and you may see the cable wrapped through a couple of times. In this case, as we read here, sometimes 5 to 7 times. But on the external cables, I've usually only seen it once or twice. So that's just what I've experienced. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what I've seen typically. All right. So in terms of how they operate, going back to the Mac here, ferrite beads are used as a passive low-pass filter by dissipating radio frequency energy as heat. So what's interesting, if you look at this little image over here, here's a ferrite core thermal image, and you can see that the core itself is, or the bead itself is actually quite warm relative to some of the other things. It looks like, wow, it looks like this is up to 67.7 Celsius, which is actually quite warm. Usually, in my experience on audio cables, they don't get quite that warm, but that's just something to keep in mind there. All right, and here's some examples of the snap-on or clamp-on ferrite beads that you probably see more commonly on the type of equipment that we're working with in audio. All right, so I mean, you can come here to the Wikipedia article for ferrite bead, and you can read in more detail if you want to learn more about that. It gets a little bit more engineering focused here. It starts talking about resistance and Q factors and other things like that. Or you can also, if you look up ferrite core, it goes much more in depth from an engineering perspective. So let's go ahead and pause there and take a listen. Now, I don't know that I've seen a lot of these. I don't see a lot of these on lav cables, and Matt actually here notes, I don't see them on many USB-C cables. Any idea why? Well, first of all, a lot of USB-C cables are relatively short, and yeah, it increases the cost. It makes them a little bit more bulky. I think people try to avoid using them if they can. But because I was running a longer cable, you can see this USB-C cable is quite long. I think this one is, I think it's 3 meters, maybe 4 meters. I needed a longer lead, so in that case, that's why we needed to, that's why in practical terms, we ended up with the ferrite beads on there. Did you look at passive DI boxes? It makes no sense in my mind to use ferrite technique. It's common with hobby users that need long USB. Someone can look for the translation of tren trafo. Okay. Well, no, I was running USB, so I was not using a passive DI. That for audio cables, yes, that makes sense. Sangpeel, the most important Tonmeister professor, did teach why such ferrite make no sense for professional audio. Depends. If professional audio includes USB cables, it seemed to solve the problem for me. So I think speaking in universals like that may be a little bit problematic. Linda says, I have used those ferrite cores on my cheaper wireless stuff like my VHS set. Ah, very interesting. Good, good. Okay. So that's what I know, Robert. That's what I know about ferrite cores and ferrite beads. Again, in quality audio cables, especially Canary Star Quad, I don't think they're necessary. I've had other Canary Star Quad cables, and I've never had an issue with interference, electromagnetic or radio frequency, and I don't have the ferrite beads on any of them except for this one that Alan made. And even Alan, by his own admission, says the only reason he puts that on there is a last-ditch insurance policy. And even with it on there, I haven't noticed any degradation in the quality of the audio. I haven't done any hardcore measurements of any sort, but to the ear, I didn't notice anything that it was doing. So maybe for those that are doing sound effects recording at extraordinarily high sample rates, like 192 kilohertz, maybe you will notice something. I'm not sure. Because a lot of times in those cases, you're picking up much higher frequencies if your microphone can support it, and your audio recorder can support it, or mixer can do it, and then they will slow those down by essentially, they'll actually downsample them to slow them and downsample them, and they're able to kind of retain some of the very, very high frequency information that was captured. So in those cases, maybe it makes a difference. In our case, 48 kilohertz recordings, I've never noticed a difference. DaVinci Girl, Sony shipped the USB cable for data transfer of the ZV-1 with a Ferrite USB cable, and this makes a lot of problems. Interesting. I would love to hear what those problems are. The SoundSpeed special cables are super reliable. Yes, hi Bandrew says, podcast. Yes, I've had great experience with these as well. I bought some. He was making them sometime during, I don't know, like 2020, 2021, somewhere in there. But they've been really good. I've never seen one on my Mogami cables either. Yeah, generally not necessary. But that's why this is an unusual example. Let me say that. For this XLR cable, this is unusual. This USB cable, not quite as unusual. But I'm super curious to hear from DaVinci Girl what problems the ZV-E1, or I'm not sure I got the model number right. I don't know the Sony model numbers that well, but the one that came with the camera, I'm curious what problems the ferrite bead has caused, just out of curiosity. Oftentimes in engineering, every decision is a trade-off. There's a pro and a con. There's a benefit and a cost. It's not unusual. So I can just say that in this case, that solved the problem. All right. While we're here, anything else in the chat that we need to jump in on? Let me just, here we go. SoundSpeed cables are top notch. There's another endorsement from a longtime audio guy. I see them a lot on camera USB data cables. A lot of the cameras have wireless capabilities, and I think they're just looking to filter some of that out, is my sense. In some cases, it might even be for regulatory compliance, as we read. So if the device has any kind of wireless capability to receive their, in the United States, FCC certification, then they probably have to, they're required to do things like that. Okay, let's talk about computer sizing. I've been on a little bit of an adventure, a journey lately. I think we talked a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the Mac Mini. This is the base model Mac Mini. And this one, it retails for $600 US, which is pretty impressive. I was able to edited 2 different videos in the end on that. Well, not in the end, I'm not done yet. But when I was doing my experimenting, I edited 2 separate videos, both in DaVinci Resolve. Actually, one in DaVinci Resolve, one in Final Cut. By base model, this is a very spare little computer. Let's go take a look here. Just in terms of specs here, I'm just going to get to the specs over here on Apple's page. An Apple M4 chip, 10-core CPU, 10-core GPU, 16-core neural engine. I know I said spare. That sounds ridiculous. But in 2025, certainly on the Apple side, this is like basically their newest generation entry-level chip. 16 gigabytes of unified memory. So that's memory that's on the actual system chip, and it's shared with graphics. It's not just user RAM or system RAM. That's everything. That's for graphics. That's for everything else as well. 256 gigabyte SSD storage, gigabit Ethernet, 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports on the back, 2 USB-C ports on the front, an HDMI port, and a headphone jack. That's what you get on the Mac Mini. Here, now we can go back to the main camera. I would say this. My experience with it is if I were really going to buy this as my main computer, and that was not the purpose of this purchase, this is actually made as a demo computer for out in the studio. The biggest thing I think it's missing is storage. Let me just be clear. I use external storage whenever I'm doing video editing or mixing or anything like that. So I'm using USB-C or Thunderbolt drives externally. I never use the internal drive as my primary working storage. Nevertheless, 256 gigabytes is a little tight. So if we come back over to the Mac here, I never ran into any RAM issues, which was really interesting. And I'm talking about editing the YouTube videos. So my videos are typically 10 to 15 minutes. Didn't have any problems there, even at export, whether it was DaVinci Resolve or Final Cut. Didn't seem to make a difference. It didn't start swapping RAM to disk or to storage. So that actually didn't seem to be that big of a problem. But if you wanted to increase it, obviously you could. Here's where things get interesting, though. If I wanted to go with something more reasonable for storage, say a terabyte, that bumps it up to $1,000. Okay, so that's interesting. So we'll come back to that in just a second. Now, on the other hand, coming back to my primary computer for the last 3 years has been a Mac Studio. I think you've seen these for editing and mixing. And so this one's spec'd a little differently. Let's just take a look at that. Okay, so this one that I have right here that I've been using for the last 3 years was the M1 Ultra, which means it was essentially 2 system chips fused together with a special interconnect. It had, well, let's go look at the Mac page. I think we'll roughly spec it out to the same thing in today's world. So in today's world, we're now on the M4 chip or the M3 Ultra. So if I were to spec it the same as what I bought originally, roughly, it's not exactly the same. I had 128 gigs. You can't get that on the Ultra anymore. But it was, it's probably more than I went. So I'll just leave it at 96. I got the 4 terabyte storage just so I'd have plenty of room. Look at the price there. That's $6,500 plus tax. And that's probably not, it was actually probably a little bit more than that because I did get 128. So that would actually be closer to almost $7,000, roughly. But what I found is that as I watched Activity Monitor, and if you're on a Mac, this is always, and you're not familiar with this app, you should probably get familiar with it. It's pretty interesting. So it will give you all of your, how your Mac is performing based on the load that you're placing on it. So you've got you can take a look at your CPUs. So here, this is a new Mac Studio, not the one I'm describing, not the original one I'm describing to you. So this is not the M1 Ultra. This is an M4 Max. But this one has 12 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores. You can watch and see, how those are being hit based on what you're doing at the time. You can also look at the memory and check to see what kind of memory pressure you've got. So this one has 64 gigabytes. We've got 20 gigabytes in use, another 44 gigabytes where it's just got cached stuff ready to go so that you just get an overall faster experience with your computer, and it's not swapping anything out to storage. So it's doing pretty well here. You can see it's got, of the 20 gigabytes that are, roughly 20 gigabytes that are being used, 14.7 are being used by apps that I'm running right now. And then you can look at also disk and network activity. It's pretty fascinating. You can see we're definitely streaming right now, so we've got plenty of network activity going. You can even look at energy usage, so on and so forth. But anyway, what I noticed over time is that with the Mac Studio, and we can go back to the main camera, the M1 Ultra Mac Studio, that was way over-spec'd for what I was doing. So there was no reason to buy another computer like that. And when I bought the Mac Mini, part of what I was looking to do was also kind of gauge, well, could I even just use a Mac Mini? The problem with the Mac Mini for me is that I've got so many things attached to it. This became a little bit problematic. So one thing I do run as well, I'll just show you this here in a second. Let's go to what's the name of this? Actually, let's go back to the main camera for just a moment here. And I'm going to pull up my orders just so I can make sure I get the right device. So I bought a USB. It's actually not a USB hub. It is a Thunderbolt hub. It is the CalDigit. Wait a second here. Here we go. Okay, switching back to the Mac. It's the CalDigit E5 Element 5, Thunderbolt 5 hub. Well, that's a mouthful of a name. But it's a nice little Thunderbolt hub. So the idea is you attach one Thunderbolt cable, Thunderbolt 5 cable, or it's actually backwards compatible. I used it with the Mac Mini as well, which is actually Thunderbolt 4. But with the new Mac Studio, Thunderbolt 5 cable attaches right here. And then you get 2 USB-C ports, 2 USB-A ports, 3 Thunderbolt 5 ports, and another USB-A port on the back. And it's powered, so it's 20 volts, 9.9 amps. So it can supply, do the math there for wattage, and I believe it's 90 watts or something like, is that right? 90 watts? No, 20 times 9.
180.
Yeah, so it should be 180. Yeah, is what it should be. In any case, that's what I use. So I have, and you might be asking, Curtis, what are you attaching to your Mac that is so intensive? We have the audio interface, which in our case is a Universal Audio Apollo X6. We have, don't laugh at me or judge me, but I have both my keyboard and mouse attached. And note that on this one there's no USB-A ports, so it fills up really quickly. I have the latest generation, but I don't like to have to charge them periodically. All of the Apple keyboards and external trackpads now are all wireless, and they're internally battery powered. And I just keep them connected all the time because I don't want to have to be in the middle of something and then be like, I have to charge. And I'm not using the Apple mouse, but so help you if you are, because you cannot charge and use it at the same time because some brilliant designer decided to put the port to charge it on the bottom of the mouse. So still don't understand that meme and why that's a thing, but that's the reality. What else do I have attached? Sometimes I have my A10 Mini attached. I often have my A10 Mini attached to, I just keep it permanently, the HDMI port attached to the A10 Mini, so that when I do my weekly live streams, we can get a feed from the Mac directly into the A10. Audio interface, keyboard, mouse, there's more than that. Oh, 2 external drives. So I have 2, what size are they? We can actually go to the disk utility, and one of them is a 2 terabyte and the other one is a 4 terabyte external drive. One of them is Thunderbolt 5 and the other one is probably a Thunderbolt 3, if I recall. But those are my working storage drives. So with all of that, and every once in a while I have to plug something else in as well. Oh, also the Mac Mini didn't have this SD card slot. I know that sounds silly, that's an important thing to some people, but I use it all the time. So having that is really nice here as well. So in terms of sizing, that made more sense. But here's the interesting thing. If we go back over to the Mac here, so let's go with an Apple M4 Max chip, not the Ultra, because the Ultra bumps up the price massively. But we got the M4 Max chip, the top one with the 40-core GPU, 64 gigabytes of memory, and let's say 2 terabytes of storage. That's $3,299. Okay, let's look at the Mac Mini. If I go back here to Mac Mini, and we'll talk about what I'm thinking here in just a second. Stick with me. Okay, let's go with the max spec for the Mac Mini. You can do an M4 Pro, not the same as the M4 Mac, but approaching it. So I can get a 14-core, 20-core GPU, and I can get 64 gigabytes of RAM, 2 terabytes of storage, And if I want the 10 gigabit Ethernet, that's not important for a lot of situations, but maybe if you need that, it's another $100. But we're already at $2,800. Relative to the Mac Studio, we're at $3,299. So we're within, what, $500? And the difference also is that, so I've got the additional ports, I've got the SD card slot, I'm paying Apple tax for Apple products. I do have the 10 gigabit Ethernet, whether I need it or not. I've got 4 Thunderbolt 5 ports plus 2 USB-C ports. So that's the difference between them. So it's almost like once you max out the Mac Mini, it makes probably more sense to just go ahead and go with the Mac Studio. One other thing to keep in mind too that I found interesting with the Mac Studio, note here that the 2 front ports are USB-C ports. However, if you upgrade to the Ultra, then you get Thunderbolt 5 ports on the front. And so instead of those just being USB-C, they bump them up to Thunderbolt 5. But just going up to the next Ultra chip, now I'm at $43.99. So that's a big price to pay for 2 more Thunderbolt ports. But in any case, what I ended up going with was this M4 with the 40-core GPU, 64 gigabytes of RAM, and 2 terabytes of storage. And I think that's going to be plenty for all of the video editing and mixing and mastering that I do. So we were able to cut the price down basically in half from what we had bought last time. Don't forget the Apple Care. That's another part of the Apple tax. That's another Apple tax. And then Matt Ruff says, never buy Apple Care. I can weigh in on that too if you like. I haven't found it as necessary for desktop computers that are something that you don't transport around. For the laptops though, we have a funny story. I hope Emma doesn't mind me telling this, but she was all excited last year. She had gotten her new skis for the ski season. And I don't know how this happened exactly, but she had the Mac laptop. She'd gotten up to do something. One of the skis fell and hit the screen. Screen shattered, didn't work at all, had to be replaced. Thankfully, we had Apple Care on that one, so it was I think it was $100 to replace it. Otherwise, it would have been probably $600 to replace it. On the desktops, I haven't found it as necessary. I don't think we've ever had to call in. We've been buying Macs for years now. We've never had to call in the warranty on the desktops. The iMacs we have, actually. The iMac we have, but the Mac Pro, the Mac Studios, and the desktop Macs that we had way back in the day, we've never had to call in. So, I don't know. So I did not buy Apple Care for the desktop. Maybe I'll regret that. But for the laptops, we do. Mark Holloway, Apple Care saved me several $1,000s. Yeah, same here, Keith. It saved us on our first iMac, and it saved us on our MacBook Pro. Yeah. If you're going to be moving this stuff around, I would consider it. Oh, good. DaVinci Girl says, Sony Cam tells you a lot of time that my original cable works not compliant, and a good quality anchor helps without Ferrite if it's not more than 1 meter. Okay, so cable length is a huge factor. Yes, completely agree. Okay, I think what is maybe lost in the translation here, I think what you're saying possibly is that the Sony basically says you need to use the original cable because to be compliant, it has the Ferrite bead on it. But in your experience, you use a quality anchor cable without Ferrite bead that's less than that's a meter or less, and it works fine. Yeah, yeah. It all just depends. It just depends. I've used lots. This is the only time I've ever needed a Ferrite bead cable is with the fairly long cable running down behind the desk, keeping it away from AC power adapters, but nevertheless, it started picking something up. I don't know what it was. I also incidentally tried much shorter cables just on a temporary basis, just to see if that solved the problem, and for whatever reason, that didn't solve the problem. So just telling you my experience.
Okay, now we have a lot of
Okay.
weighing in on computer
Okay,
systems
let's talk
and show and
computers.
tell.
Let's do show and tell. Let's talk. Okay. That mini is so cute and a real value. I completely agree, Lyndon. This is interesting. Let me just show you this. Here's the Mac Studio versus the Mac Mini. Also, the Mac Studio is like 6 times heavier. And incidentally, the new one that I bought that does not have the Ultra is substantially lighter than this M1 Ultra Mac Studio. I don't know if they've changed the design or something, but I just bought a new secondhand 19-inch Axe FX Ultra guitar effect rack from 2011 for just 300 euros and need now a Mac laptop with High Sierra to run the effect board. It's in 2011, better than their actual effect rack for 3,000 euros. Very cool. That sounds like fun. I didn't know you played guitar, but that'll be fun. Matt says, yeah, I love my Mac Mini M4 Pro, not the base model. Since I'm retired, I decided I don't need the Mega Studio model anymore. The Pro gives you gives you Thunderbolt 5 ports and a few more things. 2 terabytes, 64 gigabytes of RAM. Important distinction. Thanks, Matt, for bringing that up. On the base model, it's actually Thunderbolt 4. The higher spec one with the M4 Pro does give you the Thunderbolt 5 ports. Is it going to make a difference in most of our worlds day to day? Thunderbolt 5 versus 4, probably not, but I think you can run more monitors as the basic upshot. Udo says a Mac Mini might be good for some audio work. I edit and color grade 6K footage and will go for the highest end Threadripper and dual RTX 5090 if budget would allow. Ooh, it's been a while since I built a PC, but that sounds like fun, Udo. And yeah, I think for just basic audio work, a lot of times a Mac Mini is going to probably be enough unless you're doing feature films with hundreds of tracks and tons of plugins. Linda says, I have a Studio M2 Max, I believe, and an M1 Pro, MacBook Pro. Both are beasts. Yeah, that's been our experience as well. They do. The Mac Mini is a technological wonder, I will say thing. The port thing is an issue though. It's dongle city. It is a problem, and that's why I use that USB hub as well, just because I can move it out of the way and I don't have everything stacked up and around the computer itself. So it gives me, and especially those external drives, they get hot. And so for best thermal performance and best performance overall, you shouldn't have those stacked up on top of each other if you can avoid it. So that's another reason I added that Thunderbolt hub, just to get them farther away from the computer, first of all, but also so I could space them out a little bit and not stack them on top of each other. Keith has Mac Studio M2 Max, 32 gigabytes of RAM, terabyte SSD. Good. I'm curious, Keith, are you finding that the terabyte SSD is enough storage? I'm assuming that you're using external storage for your project work, but I would assume that 1 terabyte's probably enough for installing apps and such. I went for 2 terabytes because I do review some apps, and I've got plugins and other apps and teaching how to use different apps, so I gave myself a little bit of extra room there. But 4 terabytes definitely wasn't necessary. Matt Ruff says, yeah, my studio monitor has more ports, and a Sateki dock has storage and USB-A ports. That's a great point. So Matt bought one of the third-party add-on things. It's basically something that's shaped. It's not as thick as, most of them are not as thick as the Mac Mini itself, but you basically stack the Mac Mini on top of it and use one of the Thunderbolt 5 port or Thunderbolt 4 or 5, depending on what you have, to attach it to that little thing that you set it on. Some of them have internal storage, so you basically get an external SSD. Plus, they have additional ports, and there are a whole bunch of them out there. I did some research on that, and lots of options, including, I think the Sateki is one of them. There is this little funky thing we talked about before with the power button on the bottom here. It has a cutout, so you can actually just reach your finger under to power the Mac on and off. Or on. I guess you don't need it for off, but when you need to power it on.
That was the thing on the bottom of the
Matt
mouse.
Ruff, regarding the mouse, Johnny Ive, so glad he's gone. He did some great things, but he also sometimes forgot the whole mantra of form follows function. Or yeah,
Yes,
whatever.
that's
Yeah,
right.
form follows. So anyway, all right, audio buff. Wow, I just found out that I'm not considered a top fan. I think I'll head over to Sound Speeds where I'll feel better about myself. What do you mean, audio buff? Are you talking about the YouTube fan ranking thing, which I think
Dumb.
is kind of dumb? But I mean, I don't really get it. I guess I should say that I don't get what they're trying to achieve there. But I consider you a very special member of the community for your contributions, for your knowledge that you share. Um, you're a top fan to us, Jude. I agree, 100%. Mark says, speaking of Mac Mini, what display do you use with yours? For the Mac Mini, actually, it's a TV. It's an LG TV. So when I'm doing the demos out here, I've got a 42-inch HDMI UHD TV that I'm using. And the reason I do that is that I can set it farther back so it's not in the frame or there's just a tiny bit of it in the frame. And I can still see it with my eyes. There's no way I could see a smaller screen than that at this point, at that distance. Daniel James Van Delsum says the Mac Studio at its size is still much smaller than a PC system. Yes, I will say this. There are massive trade-offs, and I recognize this as well. With Apple's move to the integrated silicon, there are massive trade-offs, and that is that the Mac computers, for the most part, are not very upgradable, certainly not internally. Even the Mac Pro that they're still selling, I don't know how long that one's going to last, but it does. The only thing you can really add are PCI cards, basically. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it's not practical. On the PC side, you can swap out any component, which is a beautiful thing. So you can, if your CPU is doing fine, but you just need more graphics power, you can get a new graphics card. Now I realize that motherboard's outdated as well, so at some point you'd have to update your motherboard to get, achieve the new standards that are released and so on and so forth. But there is a beauty to being able to upgrade a PC, which you cannot do. Now, some people say, yeah, you can crack open the Mac Mini and add RAM. And it's like, I'm not doing that. I have, every once in a while, I have a really enthusiastic DIY spirit, but when this one's okay, fair enough. This one was $600, but the one that cost over $3,000, I'm not likely to crack that open and start messing around with components in there. I don't know. Lucas says, I love to have everything in one place, MacBook at home connecting to my Thunderbolt hub and on the road only with the MacBook. Therefore, you pay by equal tech specs $1,000 more. Yeah, exactly. That is, or pounds or whatever. It is, yeah, it's a substantial amount more for that portability. In our case, I don't need that level of portability. So that's why I use the Studio. Keith does have all of his media on external SSDs. Okay, totally makes sense. Yeah. That's the norm these days, it seems, on these Macs at least. All right, DaVinci Girl, I have an Epiphone
This is the guitar.
Sheraton 2 Pro, and Jans Larson is my teacher, and Hans Martin Buff, the Grammy winner, and Prince, and the Scorpions, and Peter Gabriel producer. Wow. All recorded with my Fairlight and Dolby Atmos. So cool. That is very cool. Thanks for sharing. I'd love to hear some of that sometime. Sounds like a lot of fun. Matt says, I still have a PC and I built my own, and case I have is 20 years old. I built many PCs. Yeah, that's the thing, is if you find a case that you really like, and there are a lot of options out there now, if you find a case you like, that can last for a long, long time. Yeah, there's more longevity there, definitely. Apple needs to really lean into daisy chaining the minis as an expansion strategy. That's an interesting idea, Linda. Yeah, I guess you'd just be limited by the bandwidth of the bus that you'd be using, in that case, the Thunderbolt bus. So if you bought the M4 Pros, you'd have a little bit more bandwidth with that Thunderbolt 5. But you could parallel process. I don't know how I know there are farms out there where they're running this stuff. Now they're talking about running local large language models on your Mac. If you buy the top end M3 Ultra chip, you've got enough neural cores to run. Wow. Yeah, I mean, I guess if that's what you're doing, that makes sense.
If you had two minis and one part on one didn't work, could you tell it to use the other part?
Oh, Danny has a question. If you had two minis and you had them connected together, say that was possible. I don't know if it is or not, but say it was possible, and one part stopped working or was maybe saturated or too busy, would it go to the other? It depends on how they implement the software. That was another thing I found about sizing computers, is that a lot of the audio stuff wasn't multi-threading as much as I would have hoped. So even in RX, which I use a lot, the adaptive phase rotation, we can actually do that. Let me just, give me a second here. Let me pull this up. Okay, we can go to the Mac, and I will, let's see here. Let's just go get our raw audio here. Okay. This one doesn't really need it, but if we did, let's look at pull up the adaptive phase rotation. So this is for when, just for context here, why I would ever use this. If you've got audio where the waveform is substantially higher amplitude on one side versus the other, so say on the top versus the bottom, you're basically kind of losing headroom. And a lot of times that'll happen with certain male voices, some brass instruments, things like that. It's pretty natural, happens a lot. But this adaptive phase rotation will help correct that, and it does it in a fairly transparent way, on voices at least, in my experience. But if we pull up the activity monitor and pull up our CPU monitor here, okay, back here, I'm going to start running this. And let's just watch and see what the CPUs do, see how much it threads. Actually, it's threading more than I thought. Maybe the newer versions do that better. But I've got these 12 performance cores sitting out there. At least 4 of them at least are kind of sitting idle. Oh, it finished. Actually, it did that pretty darn fast. Wow. It actually did thread more than I expected, but there are certain processes I've noticed where it just doesn't thread quite as much. So parallelizing like that can save you time on some intensive tasks, but the software has to support it for it to do that, to be effective. Chris, it doesn't matter whether Mac has Thunderbolt 4 or 5 ports, or whether you're using a Thunderbolt 3, 4, or 5 cable, if you're using an external SSD or hard drive with a 10K disk speed. Well, the SSD drives can actually go quite a bit faster.
Here's the second part.
You're still limited by the drive's transfer speed and buffer. That's true. Absolutely true. Let's get the disk speed. Oh, I haven't downloaded it yet. But if you get actually I can download it from right here.
Do you want me to go there?
Yes, let's just go ahead and go over here. So here we are on the Blackmagic disk speed test. Let's just choose one of our external drives just for grins and giggles. Here's one of them. Let's do a read and write speed test. So this is the older one. We're getting about 1.5 or 1500 megabytes per second write, and now it's going up 1800, 2500 on the read side. Oh, not so good this time. More like 1800. So this is an older. There's I think a Thunderbolt 3, but you're right, Chris. Just to clarify, it's not the It's not the bus that's slowing us down here. Let's go ahead and stop that one. Let's choose the other drive, the newer drive. This is an OWC Envoy Ultra, I believe it's called. Whoa, we're writing at 4,500 megabytes per second and reading at over 5,000 megabytes per second. So the drive absolutely makes a difference. I was getting those, by the way, I was getting those same numbers on the Mac Mini with Thunderbolt 4. So yeah, you're right. It's not that. It's if you're starting to parallel, like if you were going to actually connect multiple Mac Minis together and they add software to support that, there is interesting. All right, there's a college who has built a small AI farm with 500 Mac Minis all connected by 10 gigabit Ethernet. So they're connected via Ethernet. Be interesting if they could connect them via Thunderbolt. Past time for a date night. Danny and Curtis, thank you so much, Matt. Very much appreciate it. Always appreciate your support. DaVinci Girl, I also do guitar sound modeling with Kemper together. There's a free open source project named Neural Audio Modeler, and we share there thousands of guitar equipment for free. The DaVinci AI stem separation, doing absolute poor sounds for guitars, and you can use it to correct any sort of guitar sound. They just do not know because their influencers have no idea what is a good sound and audio. LOL. Okay, sounds like you got some cool stuff going on there. All right, Uda says RX spectral denoise, etc. on Windows uses all 32 threads in my machine. Very cool. So it looks like at least on the Windows side. I apologize. I probably should have checked before I said that. There were times when I checked in the past and not all the threads were getting used. All right. So TBD on whether the new Mac Studio with 40 GPU cores is enough. My guess is probably for what I'm doing. I'm doing UHD video. Well, no, actually, it's actually the capture we actually do in 4K. We do 4096 by 2160 capture for the talking head part. It's in that Canon MXF format, so it's not the most optimized for playback, yet the Mac Studio seems to do fine. Both the old one with the M1 Ultra and the new one with the M4 Max. Both seem to play it back just fine. And then we layer on 4K footage on top of that. So we use the 2:1 aspect ratio on the main channel for our videos. So we're actually capturing in true 4K or Cinema DCI 4K. It does fine. For audio processing, it does fine. I didn't notice a substantial difference in export speeds either when I was exporting the final video on the Mac Mini. TBD on the new Mac Studio, but I expect it to be pretty much the same. We are talking about a 3-year-old M1 Mac, so I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Far fewer CPU cores, but just about the same amount of GPU cores, if I remember right. All right. Well, there's the nerd discussion for today. I hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, we have just a few more minutes. If you want to tag them with @CurtisJetAudio, that makes it easy for Danny to find them and to post them out down here so that we can talk it through. Hope you're all doing well out there, having fun on your audio projects. This week, for me, we had... my team and I were in studio all week. We were able to finish production on 10 different videos. So the actual production, not post. Now they go to post, but that was exciting and fun and enjoyable. All right, John. Hi, Curtis. What shock mount do you use with your MKH50? Thank you. I use the shock mount provided by Sennheiser. Is this good enough, do you think? Well, I think, John, yeah, when it's on a static boom pole, I just use the included shock mount. There are two. There's a mic stand clip and the shock mount. I use the shock mount. It's different, though, when you're going to be booming outdoors and you need wind protection. In those cases, then, unless you're using just like a slip-on type of wind protector, which only works in very, very mild wind, then I usually I actually don't use the 50 outdoors. That's the short version. But if I did, they do make specific lyre mounts, Lyre mounts for the MKH50, which is the strangest shaped microphone in the history of the world. I don't know why they made it the shape that it is. But I think both Radius and Rycote makes lyres that will fit it just fine. Also, Sonella. Robert, thank you for your insights on ferrite cores, and thank you for asking the question. I apologize I don't know all the engineering details about it, but they are also used for other things. They're often used in power supplies. They'll wind copper wire around the outside of the core. They're used in AM radio transmission. They are used in a lot of different applications. So they're a kind of a universal, well, not a universal, they're an electronic component that's used for a lot of different things. Pretty cool. The rendering on these Macs still blow the mind. I completely agree, Linda. We're spoiled in some ways. Audio Buff, how long does it take for you to produce one video course? Well, obviously the wireless one has been going on for a long time because I just haven't had time to get back to it and finish it. This week, we did not have a video on our main channel because I had Emma working on capturing B-roll for the wireless course, which we did all the original production in May. We spent a week in May putting that together. Emma's doing the B-roll now, then we'll cut that in. I would say generally it's going to take me about 2 weeks of full-time work to put in to create a new course is generally what I would say if I were working on it full-time. Oh, Chris. Drinks for me for date night. on you for date night. Thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate it so much. And thanks for being a member of the community. Wow. Lillian Rambu, thank you for the super chat there as well. Very generous community, in addition to being generous with your time and your expertise and your talents. I appreciate that so much. All right. Matt, I'm happy, to John, I'm happy with the provided shock mount indoors. I use the 416 outside in a Rycote mount. Yeah, that's similar to me as well. But yeah, that shock mount that it comes with seems to do a pretty nice job. Even if you're, the nice thing about the MKH50 is it's fairly immune to handling noise relative to other microphones. The 8050 is not so immune to handling noise, so you need a very good shock mount for that. But the included shock mount with the MKH50 seems to do a nice job. Some people don't like it because it's very different than most other shock mounts. It's using the old school kind of elastic bands, but it seems to do the job nicely in my experience. All right, friends, thank you for coming to this week's Sound for Video session. Get out there and make some great sound, and we will talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody.